is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliette Mann. Our top stories. Inflation in the United States eases to the lowest level in 2 years, but some goods and services show the cost of living crisis hasn't gone away.
Our other headlines: US President Joe Biden urges the Northern Ireland Assembly to reconvene before arriving in Dublin on the latest leg of his trip to Ireland.
Brazil's president arrives in China for a state visit, with trade and investment top of the agenda.
Do not buy a new car just yet. Why an oversupply of new vehicles is set to flood global markets and slash prices.
And 2 years after announcing it was going to build a new space station, we'll find out whether Russia's any closer to getting into orbit.
US consumer inflation has eased to its lowest level in nearly 2 years. Fed officials are watching the data closely ahead of the next policy meeting in May.
Data from last month showed prices for a basket of goods are still a bit more expensive. The consumer price index was up 0.1% in March and 5% from a year ago.
The core consumer price index, though, paints a rather different picture. It accelerated 0.4% and 5.6% compared to the same time last year. Remember, this figure excludes food and energy, suggesting that price pressures for some goods and some services are still elevated. Economists often view this as a better measure of the overall picture.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York. Hello there, John. So are these inflation figures a surprise? And also, what does it tell us about the US economy?
Well, the thing is, I would say this is what you call a Goldilocks report. Now, last week I managed to say Goldilocks and the Seven Dwarfs. I was wrong, of course, because it's Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And you remember from the kiddies' nursery rhyme, the porridge there is not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. And pretty much that's the way we have it on Wall Street today. And it shows that the blunt tool, the cudgel, if you will, the cudgel of raising interest rates in order to bring down record high inflation is working. But of course there's been a price to pay because thousands of people have lost their jobs, particularly in the tech industry, although at the same time the jobs market remains very robust, which is one of the things that we don't properly understand about all of this. Now, I'm just going to run through these numbers one more time. So year on year, we're at 5% now, down from 6%. That's good. Take out food and energy, they've gone, and you've got 5.5%, but we were expecting it to be 5.6%. So that's quite good as well, although it's more elevated than the headline figure. And we're down now to 5% from 9% last June. So that's very, very good. But here's the problem. Gasoline in this report was lower, and we know that gas prices are going to go up, don't we? Because the Saudis and the other OPEC members are going to cut by 1 million barrels a day starting in May. So we know that gasoline is going to go back up again. And gasoline is a major component of all of this, and it's very worrying for people. So that's where the question mark is at the moment. But on the face of it, this has been a pretty good report for the first time, Juliette, and I remember talking to you in the early days of this, the first time in about 18 months or so, that we've had this elevated inflation after 30 years of inflation being no more than about 2%.
So what's the Fed going to make of this? I mean, like the potential change in oil prices, they're meeting in May.
Yeah, they meet on the, I think it's the 2nd and 3rd. No, the 21st and 22nd. I don't know, I can't remember now. But anyway, I think it's early May, actually. They'll be meeting next. And we will get a clue this afternoon because the minutes of the last meeting, that's it. The last meeting was on the 21st and 22nd of March. And the minutes from that are going to be published in 2 hours from now. So we'll have a clue about what members of the FOMC committee are thinking about. Now, if you put elevated prices to one side, if you just forget the fact that the core was up a little bit there, although it was less than we expected, so that's good. If you put that to one side, I think this all plays into what they call the one and done theory. So the Federal Reserve next meets on the 2nd and 3rd of May, And the one-and-done theory is that they'll do one more interest rate hike, probably 25 basis points, which is more or less the minimum that they can do. And then after that, they will pause. And then, for the rest of 2023, they have three options. They can pause and continue pausing. They can pause and cut, which was unthinkable at the beginning of this year. Nobody thought that would happen. Or, of course, they can pause and then restart hiking again, which nobody wants.
And what about the markets? How have US markets reacted to this news?
We were all high-fiving each other here, slapping each other on the back, smiles all round, congratulating people for about 10 seconds. And then the reality of all this set in. You know, the future, this happened for us at 8:30 in the morning, so the market here doesn't open for a whole other hour. And the futures market shot up. It was up by about 200 points. The dollar fell, gold rallied, bond yields were lower. But now I think everything I've spoken about has sunk in a little bit. And as of this moment, we have the Dow up 54 points, the Nasdaq down 10 points, and the S&P 500 ahead by 4 points. And we still have a significant week to come. We've still got wholesale inflation, PPI. We've still got retail sales, which of course is very significant for obvious reasons. And on Friday, we begin earnings season for the first quarter with the big banks reporting, including JP Morgan Chase, the global behemoth Citigroup, and also Wells Fargo. And that will give us a little hint about the banking crisis as well. So there's a lot more to come in the next 3 days.
Lots of things on investors' radar. John Terrett in New York, thank you.
Switzerland's parliament has rejected a Credit Suisse rescue package. The lower house voted 102 to 71 to reject government guarantees authorized last month of about $110 billion. The emergency plan was spearheaded to help keep Credit Suisse afloat and shepherded into a takeover by Swiss banking rival UBS. The vote took place as part of a special parliamentary session that opened on Tuesday.
Accounting firm EY has called off plans to split its auditing and consulting divisions. The firm, formerly known as Ernst & Young, abandoned the plan after its United States arm decided not to proceed. Billed Project Everest, the move would have been the biggest shake-up in the accountancy industry for more than 2 decades. The announcement ends a year-long battle to garner internal support for the breakup.
The share of trade finance paid for in China's currency has more than doubled since the invasion of Ukraine. Analysts say it reflects both greater use of China's currency to facilitate trade with Russia and the rising cost of dollar financing. Trade financing data from SWIFT shows that the renminbi share of value of the market rose from less than 2% in February 2022 to 4.5% a year later.
Dutch government will phase out all liquefied natural gas imports from Russia. Energy Minister Rob Jetten said the Netherlands quietly stopped signing new contracts this year and is looking to wind down pre-existing contracts. Despite the fallout over the conflict in Ukraine, large volumes of Russian LNG continue to flow to Europe.
US President Joe Biden has called for the power-sharing government in Northern Ireland to be restored while on his historic trip to Belfast.
Biden made the comments in a speech marking the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, which ended 30 years of violence. He said protecting peace in Northern Ireland is something that brings America together.
Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Peter Oliver in Belfast. Peter, what has the President been calling for?
Well, he used part of his speech to pay homage to those that put in all of the effort to get the Good Friday Agreement across the line, all of the hard work that had gone on to put an end to the dark days of the Troubles. He paid tribute to George Mitchell, the US Senator who chaired those talks. He said that George Mitchell had told him they were 700 days of failure followed by 1 day of success, and that showed that you had to persevere in the pursuit of peace. But when it came to the current situation regarding Stormont, where the Northern Ireland Assembly sits and currently isn't sitting because of a dispute with the DUP, the main unionist party here, the main pro-British Union party, who won't take up those seats because of a dispute over post-Brexit trade agreements. He said that that really should be important place. That was a huge part of the Good Friday Agreement, getting that deal done and getting that power sharing agreement put in place. So he was disappointed that wasn't there. Overall, it was a fairly positive speech by the US president. It has been reasonably well received here. However, there are still many that feel that this much pared back agenda for the US president, he was here than less than 24 hours in Belfast, that this really was a missed opportunity for Joe Biden to try and do some real good here in Northern Ireland.
In his remarks at Ulster University, the US president spoke of the importance of keeping the hard-fought-for peace in Northern Ireland and getting the political apparatus that the Good Friday Agreement established back up and running.
So I hope the Assembly and the Executive will soon be restored. That's a judgment for you to make, not me, but I hope it happens. Along with the institutions that facilitate North-South and East-West relations, all of which are vital pieces of the Good Friday Agreement. For in politics, no matter what divides us, if we look hard enough, there are always areas that are going to bring us together if we look hard enough.
Travelling with Joe Biden is his special envoy to Northern Ireland, Joe Kennedy III, whose job is going to be to boost US investment in Northern Ireland. But while the centre of Belfast was encircled in a ring of steel for the president's visit, Stormont, the seat of the Northern Ireland Assembly, is empty. It had been expected that President Biden would address that institution, which was created by the Good Friday Agreement, to allow the nationalist and unionist sides in the conflict to pursue their goals by parliamentary, not paramilitary means. However, the latest political impasse over post-Brexit trade means the Assembly isn't in session. This is a huge missed opportunity for Northern Ireland, says the former Sinn Féin Finance Minister, Martin O'Malley.
The British haven't played their part. The British have coddled the unionists who are refusing to go back into the power-sharing administration. And I think what you're seeing here is the US government being curtailed by the British, that the British actually view this as almost like a dirty little secret. If President Biden wants to come to Belfast and the north of Ireland, get him in and get him out again as soon as possible. So without a doubt, it's going to be an opportunity missed.
While the US president said he would prod and nudge the DUP back into government in Stormont, statements from the biggest unionist party have suggested that probably wasn't going to have any impact.
The longer Northern Ireland goes without a functioning government, the higher the bills are stacking up. The Northern Ireland Fiscal Council estimates the country needs an additional $1 billion, or just over that amount, every single year in order to keep services at the current levels. That's because of rising energy costs and wage demands. A new raft of US investment is promised, but it's unlikely to be enough to bridge that funding gap. Well, President Biden is in the Irish Republic now. He'll be making a visit to some towns where his ancestors came from originally before moving over to the United States. He'll also be addressing a joint session of the Irish Parliament on Thursday before making his way back to the United States late Friday evening, perhaps early hours of Saturday morning.
Peter, thank you for that. Our correspondent Peter Oliver in Belfast.
Well, Mitchell Rees is a former US Special Envoy for Northern Ireland during the George W. Bush administration. I ask him what we can expect from the President's trip to Dublin.
Well, I think the strong bonds between the United States and Ireland, there's an estimated 40 million Irish Americans, people who claim Irish ancestry, so there's a strong bond between the two countries. I think the President also wants to associate himself with a significant diplomatic accomplishment, the Good Friday Agreement. From 25 years ago, it's the anniversary, and it's immeasurably improved the life in Northern Ireland. And I think third is that we're in the presidential campaign cycle already, and so I think the President wants to showcase his strong bonds to Ireland, and so it has a domestic political component as well.
I want to talk about that domestic component in a moment. But when he was in Belfast over tea, Joe Biden and UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reflected on the legacy of the Good Friday Agreement. What do you think that legacy really is?
Well, I think one of the legacies is the example that it shows of the United States supporting its friends and allies around the world. The United States played a crucial role in helping the parties reach an agreement that ended the Troubles and stood up the Stormont Assembly. So I think that's one of the legacies. The other legacy, I think, is the ongoing American commitment to the UK and to the people of Ireland to support peace however we can.
Let's talk about the restoration of the devolved government. I mean, Biden made a very carefully worded plea, didn't he, to resume power sharing at Stormont. The DUP said the visit doesn't actually change the political dynamic. Do you think it's going to make a difference? Does it?
Well, the DUP is right. Just a visit for a day by the president doesn't change the underlying dynamic. But there is a greater imperative to get some type of agreement between the two parties so that Stormont can be stood up again. The United States is giving the opportunity to all the people of Northern Ireland for much greater economic investment. So good jobs, good wages. This is something that Northern Ireland desperately needs. And again, it's going to be very difficult for corporate America to make that investment unless there's a functioning government up and running in Belfast.
He talked about Northern Ireland as being a transformed place. You spent time there as a special envoy. What transformations did you see?
Oh, I think it's clear for anybody who remembers the horrors of the Troubles. The place, Belfast is now a modern European city in many ways. So I think that the reduction, significant reduction in the level of violence, I think, is probably one of the greatest legacies. But that said, there's still some work to be done. There's still paramilitaries on both sides of the divide. There's socioeconomic deprivation. And there needs to be much more integration of Catholics and Protestants in everyday life in Northern Ireland. So that's some of the work that many people are doing, but still there's more that needs to be done.
Brazilian President Lula da Silva has arrived in Shanghai for a state visit to China. He's leading a delegation of 240 business representatives, and more than 20 deals are expected to be signed during this trip. Apart from Shanghai, Lula will then visit Beijing and meet Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping later this week. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Paula Cabral, who's there for us. Paula, this visit to China comes after Lula's 100th day in office. What does he want to achieve?
That's it. Very important moment for Lula da Silva, and this trip has got both pragmatic and more symbolic aspects. From a symbolic point of view, officials from the Brazilian government say the moment to relaunch relations with China, because in the previous government of Jair Bolsonaro, the president was very critical of China on many occasions, and also President Lula wants to relaunch Brazil's stature in the international scenario that, say many analysts, also was much reduced during the years of Bolsonaro.
The canary melon, being plucked off the ground in Brazil's northeastern state of Rio Grande do Norte, is bound for a long journey, all the way around the globe to customers in China. After a couple test runs last year to close contracts and study logistics, this large farm is now preparing to ship high volumes of its fruit to the Chinese market.
We are projecting that in the 2023 harvest, we will export between 100 and 200 containers per week to the Chinese market, not counting other Asian markets that are also interested in our products.
Now the company is working on licenses to also begin exporting watermelons to China, a more delicate and perishable melon variety.
It's very gratifying to be working to pick a fruit that will be shipped out of the country to feed other peoples in other cultures.
The farm's manager says logistics is the biggest hurdle in increasing exports to China.
We have many fruits in our country and here in our region, like mango, watermelon, banana, papaya, and exports have been increasing year after year. And with fruit exports, the big challenge is to get the products quickly to the final customers. So we need policies and measures to improve our logistics.
Rio Grande do Norte has ambitious plans to expand its trade with China, but for that, the state needs to increase its port capacity.
Despite Rio Grande do Norte's favorable geographical location, it's the shortest Atlantic crossing between South America and Africa. The state's main port has berths for only 3 vessels, and the bridge right at the canal's entrance limits their size. The State Secretary says talks are already underway with one of China's biggest engineering firms on construction of a new port, and hopes President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's visit to China will help cement the project.
Mas esse porto será multiuso.
It will be a multi-purpose port. We could export our iron ore there. We have proven reserves of 600 million tons of iron ore. We also produce much salt, and we are exporting only half of it, simply for not having a better port. And also our traditional products, such as fruits like melon.
Eu estou falando em produtos tradicionais. A nossa fruta, o melão, por exemplo.
China has just lifted a one-month ban on Brazilian beef tied to an isolated case of mad cow disease. For the foreseeable future, some key commodities like beef and soy are likely to be the main exports to China. But diversification could help ease the negative impacts when problems arise with any one product.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, tech in trouble. How jitters in the City of London are affecting UK startups.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann. Welcome back to Global Business Europe. London is Europe's leading hub for tech investment, but British startups have warned that funding is starting to dry up.
Potential investors are becoming more risk-averse in the face of rising costs and, of course, the collapse of America's Silicon Valley Bank. Our correspondent Li Jianhua reports.
This is one of the United Kingdom's many social clubs. It is one of the many places people can go to socialize and enjoy live music. For visitors like me, seeking an authentic British night out is anything but easy. Now, an app developer is trying to promote small gigs like this and give them a fair chance to showcase their performances.
We're currently in a club just outside London, and we believe there are hundreds of clubs like this all around every city, around every country in the world. And our plan is to ensure that we can digitalise all of these venues to ensure that all the data that comes from these audiences can be used to drive more revenue for these bands.
But Mark says the biggest problem right now is fundraising. A report by Atomico, an international investment firm, has found that tech funding in the UK alone saw investment drop by 22% last year. Experts say the primary reason is high interest rates.
The primary driver is as interest rates go up, the value of stocks, because most of the money in these companies gets made in the future. Those numbers, may still be the same exact numbers as they were like, a year ago in terms of what they were projecting, but you discount them back by a much higher rate.
Hussein says investors are looking for startups that can potentially become winners in particular categories.
If you can build a new product or new service that kind of takes advantage of the new disruption, which is AI, and you can grow a brand new category and win that category. You can build a very, very large company.
For tech startups, ideas do matter. Yet the collapse of America's Silicon Valley Bank does make many investors and entrepreneurs in the UK have second thoughts on starting or backing a business.
I think it's really important to recognize how important SVB is in the tech ecosystem globally, particularly in the US and in the UK. If these companies don't have access to their funds, if they're not able to make payroll, which will be coming up very soon, if they're not able to pay the suppliers, and it's important to recognize that these companies are also the lifeblood of the innovation ecosystem.
This is the Silicon Roundabout area, also known as the East London Tech City. A cluster of tech startup companies started right from here over 10 years ago with the support of the UK government, but now the economic downturn has made many investors become pretty careful with every penny they spend. Li Jianhua, CGTN, London.
Many of Britain's fruit and vegetable growers are in financial trouble with rising energy costs and a shortage of labour.
That's forcing some farmers to take rather drastic action to cut their losses. Our correspondent Michael Voss reports.
The southeastern county of Kent has been known for centuries as the Garden of England, famous for its fruit. Many farms in the area grow apples, mainly for the domestic market rather than export. But making a profit has become increasingly difficult in recent years, and now with rising costs, some farmers have had enough.
I don't really want to get rid of all of my fruit, but I simply cannot see a way of overcoming all of the challenges of growing, picking, storing the crop, only to know that our retailers in the UK largely refuse to pay us a viable price for what we've done.
James Smith is clearing the apple orchards, uprooting and destroying about 80% of all his trees. Last year, he says, his business made a loss of almost $200,000. His family have grown apples here for almost 150 years, but that tradition is about to come to an end. Last year's harvest has not been sold. Wooden crates are packed into a warehouse where they're kept at around 1 degree Celsius to keep them fresh. Energy costs, though, have shot up following the conflict in Ukraine.
What we've seen in the last 18 months is this enormous rise in all sorts of costs, be it interest rates, electricity, labour. And at the same time, we've seen a decrease in the amount of money we're paid by the retailers for our fruit. And our supermarket shelves are full of imported produce, while our fruit is still sat in cold stores, costing a huge amount of money because of the electricity we're using.
Earlier this year, supermarkets ran out of tomatoes and cucumbers, partly because of problems in Spain and Morocco. But many UK producers who grow salad produce under cover over winter stopped planting because of high heating costs. Britain's fruit production has been in decline for almost a decade, according to the government, and the country now imports almost 85% of all the fruit consumed annually. Smith is trying to diversify. He's bought a juicing business to use the small amount of apples he still grows. He's also trying to grow cherries and has a farm shop. But as farmers come under increasing financial pressure, there are concerns about food security and the country becoming over-reliant on imports. Michael Voss, CGTN.
Now, do not buy a car until you've listened to this next piece. Car prices are expected to plummet this year as global car production picks up after years of coronavirus disruption. A recent report by the investment group UBS says car manufacturing is set to exceed sales by 6% this year. The move will result in an oversupply of more than 5 million vehicles, with car makers already preparing for a price war. Well, let's talk to Jim Saker, the director of the Centre for Automotive Management at Loughborough University in the UK. Jim, welcome back. Lovely to see you. It seems like only yesterday I was sitting here boring on about pandemic-induced chip shortages and coronavirus production delays. I mean, how do we get to a place where we're talking about oversupply being a major issue?
I think their study is quite interesting, but I think it does paint a very different picture to what is actually happening on the ground. because it's going to vary from one country to another as to the level of supply coming through, which manufacturers are able to supply and which manufacturers are not. So most of the study is based on what they're projecting to do, with no necessary guarantee that they will be able to supply those numbers.
OK, so which types of cars are going to lose most value, and which sectors are going to be the most resilient in light of all of this?
Well, I think it's interesting. If you go back to Toyota and the RAV4, there's a wait list of 12 months on those currently in the UK. So are you looking at a time whereby in 12 months' time there's going to be an oversupply, or are most of the companies simply backfilling orders and order bank they already have? The cars that are likely to suffer the most will be the internal combustion engine vehicles. Obviously in China they've had a bit of a sort of a market downturn regarding internal combustion engine vehicles because of the July the 1st deadline that they've placed, and Volkswagen and SEAT had to invest $537 million in giving subsidies to reduce the price. So it's a very much more complicated picture than the study actually reflects. It's not as simple as they're saying.
Back in January, Tesla cut their car prices by thousands of dollars. I mean, what impact are we seeing on the EV market? If you were a Tesla buyer who bought then, presumably you'd be rather cheesed off now, owning a car that is worth rather less than you thought.
Very much so. If you bought it outright, then you've got a problem with the residual value when you want to exchange it. The Tesla reaction was definitely because Chinese manufacturers like BYD are coming onto the market with really competitive product at a very much lower price point. So therefore, they were going to be in a very difficult position going forward unless they actually undertook a price drop. So residual values have been shot, right the way through the Tesla range.
So what does this mean for demand? I mean, presumably it's not going to lessen. Presumably consumers are going to wait for this oversupply to trickle down and translate into lower purchase prices?
Well, I think a lot of people, it's very much dependent on the governments of the various countries. The EU has got a 2035 deadline for the zero emissions, 2030 in the UK. Now, most people will wait until you get nearer that point before they start thinking of buying an electric vehicle or an alternative fuel vehicle, because fundamentally the technology will change over a 7, 10, 12-year period. So therefore, buying an EV now, unless you're going to get rid of it fairly quickly, isn't in fact a smart move. It's basically you need to wait until you get the latest technology before you get the government stepping in and placing a deadline on it.
We've been talking about new car sales and oversupply. What does this mean for used car sales? I mean, how's it going to affect used car prices?
Well, I think the used car market in Europe will stay fairly steady, because what you've got is, historically, in most of Europe, the oldest ever car park. That means basically the oldest range of cars currently on the road that you've ever had since the start of the industry. Because of the undersupply during the COVID era, most of the cars on average are a lot older than they would normally expect them to be. So therefore, the used car market is likely to be quite buoyant, because people are going to need to start changing their vehicles and may not want to go into a new one straight away. So I would say that used cars in the UK, they went up 27% the year before last. It's a very steady, solid market at the moment.
Given a car is the most expensive thing most of us buy, apart from our houses, you can forgive purchasers for being rather unsettled by all of this. I mean, what is your advice to car buyers who might be now slightly unnerved after this story knocks around the motoring press around the world?
Well, I think it does depend which country you're in and what the market currently offers. If you took in the UK at the moment, you take Volvo, you can't buy actually a Volvo electric vehicle. You can only hire them on personal contract hire. So therefore, in reality, you're only hiring the vehicle. So therefore, it won't matter if you're doing that, because you're paying basically a rental. In some markets, you can't do that. But, the markets that do that, most people will be going, well, okay, I'll take this contract on a bit like my mobile phone contract, and I'll keep it for 3 years and then hand it back at the end of that term. So, it's looking around and saying what is available in the country that you're operating in, and then coming up with a sensible solution.
Jim, good to talk to you. Thanks very much for coming on the programme. Jim Saker, Director of the Centre for Automotive Management at Loughborough University in the UK.
Thank you, Joe.
To keep in touch with the news from China and our correspondents all around Europe, head to the Telegram app on your phone and search CGTN Europe. Follow the channel to get updates sent directly to you, including pictures, features and interviews.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, secrets and spies. More revealing details following the alleged leak of highly classified Pentagon documents.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, in the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Inflation in the United States eases to the lowest level in 2 years, but some goods and services show the cost of living crisis hasn't gone away yet.
And US President Biden urges the Northern Ireland Assembly to reconvene before arriving in Dublin on the latest leg of his trip to Ireland.
Now, more details are emerging following the leak of alleged United States classified intelligence documents. It could have an impact on the Ukraine conflict, as well as relations between the United States and its allies. While the files have not been verified so far, the alleged claims are revealing. Well, our correspondent, Yolo Abdabith, has been following the story in Europe. Yolo.
Yes, around 100 documents, Jamie, are still being investigated by the Pentagon. And the alleged leak has raised several questions about the military preparedness of Ukraine regarding their anticipated spring offensive. Now, the documents have also revealed the presence of special forces from several NATO countries on the ground in Ukraine, including the UK, the United States and Latvia. Now, some of the files appear to show evidence that the US is spying on several countries, including allies like South Korea and Israel.
Well, Yolo, come and join us. I mean, it's obviously a complex story, a big story spanning the world's intelligence communities. What do you think we're learning, essentially, from these leaks as they come out, day by day?
As that investigation by the Pentagon goes on, trying to find the source of the leak, I mean, from the Ukraine war point of view, initially, it looks as if the amount of armaments and weapons that the Ukrainians keep asking the West for, they haven't got. And that lack of detail before their, as we understand, their spring offensive to try and push Russian forces back, even though they've been defending all winter, it seems they don't have it. And actually, what I saw last month backs that up in terms of the lack of shells, the lack of armaments, and the fact that they are still using Soviet-style weapons. Some of them 40, 50-year-old weapons are still being used, and they have a quota of shells to use in some locations. So all that must be worrying for the Allied countries, as well as for the Ukrainians. And then this issue of foreign troops, special forces from those countries, if indeed they are in, it blows a hole in the argument that the West is not directly involved on the ground, even if they are supplying weapons to Ukraine. So there'll be scrutiny on that. And I think also, in terms of what precisely is the West's role in this war with Russia, and the casualty figures, which are not being disclosed by either side, well, if those leaks are correct, in that 230,000 Ukrainian troops have been killed or wounded, and around an estimated 130,000 in terms of Ukraine, they're huge losses for both sides. And of course, all this is unverified, but if there's an element of truth there, then I think many, many people will sit up.
You say it's yet unverified. What is the potential fallout?
I think the potential fallout, we're already seeing it.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the Europe response to ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict is one of these files that have been released. And 38 European countries are listed in a chart in terms of where they stand on the support for Ukraine, military support or otherwise. And I think that it shows the degree of impact that, you know, the close surveillance in a way that the Americans are watching what all these NATO countries and other European countries are doing in terms of their support. Not just South Korea, that they've agreed to send humanitarian aid, but now obviously the Americans want them to send military aid, or indeed their interest in how Mossad and the Israelis are looking at how the Israeli government are actually conducting themselves. But take Serbia, for instance, or the UK with special forces there, and the fact that Serbia, with those close cultural ties to Russia, they want to join the European Union. So where do they stand if there's expectation for them to send weapons as well to Ukraine?
I mean, you've spent a lot of time reporting from Ukraine over the last year. I mean, how do you think this is going to go down in Ukraine, where presumably it's going to be reported widely?
Of course, and they'll be watching and reading on social media, and they'll be seeing the fallout, and they'll be seeing the responses also from other countries. There will be dismay, I'm pretty sure of that, but they want those weapons from the West in order to try and, as they see it, defend their country against outside aggression. So they will not be complaining too loudly against the Americans or anybody else. However, it does give them time. If this spring offensive is going to happen, they do have time to modify their plans, and they have shown in the last 13 months how adaptable they have been in terms of how they are responding to Russian pressure and how they are doing their fighting with, at times, meagre resources.
Yolo, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Yolo Abdavith.
Our correspondent, Jack Barton, has more on the reaction from Seoul on those spying claims.
Well, it certainly comes at a bad time for the Yoon government, because President Yoon Suk-yeol will be heading to Washington later this month to have a face-to-face meeting with President Joe Biden. And whether these are fabrications or true, this is no doubt going to come up as a talking point between the two leaders. We've heard again from the Foreign Minister today, Park Jin, who said most of the documents relating to South Korea were fabricated, but not all of them. So he's indicating there that some of them are indeed correct, but not saying which is which. The most damning among them, a conversation between two national security advisors of President Yoon Song-yeol discussing the shipment of artillery shells to Ukraine, something that South Korea hasn't done. It's been under pressure from the US to do that. But whether it's real or not, of course, extremely uncomfortable. And for the opposition party, it's grounds for an independent inquiry. They're not just concerned about the fact the US seems to have been spying, and the opposition party says if it's true, they want an apology and they want to guarantee it will never happen again. They're worried about the nature of the information as it relates to the conflict in Ukraine, and they're also worried that this could have happened in President Yoon Song-yeol's secure bunker. The president paid a lot of money when he came to office to move from the Blue House, the former presidential office, into what was the Defense Ministry, believing it would be much more secure, particularly the bunker area where they hold the meetings, and that's supposed to be impregnable even to South Korean intelligence agencies. So if we find out where this leak is supposed to have occurred, and it happened in this sensitive area.
Well, Italy's cabinet has called a state of emergency following a rise in migrants crossing the Mediterranean from North Africa. In just the last few days, 3,000 migrants have landed in the country, with the Coast Guard having to rescue 2,000 of them. Our correspondent Alex Fraser is in Milan. Alex, tell us a little bit more about the scale of the problem here and why there has been a rise in migrants arriving.
So already this year, there's been over 30,000 migrants landing from the Mediterranean route, from those from that route from Tunisia and across from Libya, coming all the way over to Italy. That's the highest number at this time of year on record. So why has that been happening? Well, there's a number of theories. One is that we're now in the post-COVID, post-pandemic period, and therefore more people are making the trip. The Meloni government has been looking to various countries in Africa to try and make deals to stop people traveling across, and perhaps people are worried that something might be done and therefore moving quicker, or even perhaps it's to do with the weather and the fact that they think that more people will make the crossing in the summer. Perhaps it's cheaper with people traffickers to come now. But all of that is leading to huge problems in terms of the people making the journey, and a number of people drowned. The first of which was the first major incident this year was back in February 26th, when 93 people drowned off the coast of Calabria. At the time, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni reacted, and she said she'd increase prison sentences for any people traffickers. And today's decree perhaps takes that to the next stage. It's a way that Italy are looking to declare this state of emergency to funnel more funds towards stopping these boats coming across and processing people quicker. They said there's big problems because the island of Lampedusa, that's the first point where people get to in the EU and in Italy. There has been huge overcrowding at the reception centre for migrants. Usually that holds between 300 to 400 people. Throughout this week, they've seen around 3,000 people. There are still other boats in the Mediterranean. I mean, this morning, a fishing boat was pulled into port in Catania in Sicily. 700 people were on board. So you start to see the huge numbers of people that have already been making this perilous journey, a journey that's killed 20,000 people since 2014, which is one of the most dangerous journeys in the world for people trying to cross into Europe.
Alex Fraser in Milan, thank you very much for that update.
The European Union's foreign policy chief has postponed a visit to China after testing positive for COVID. Joseph Borrell was due to arrive in Beijing on Thursday for his state visit, but Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock is still expected to make the trip. This follows last week's state visit by French President Emmanuel Macron.
Iran has reportedly sent weapons and military equipment into Syria through earthquake relief flights, according to Western sources. The operation lasted for nearly 7 weeks following the devastating February the 6th earthquake, and the supplies included parts of the air defense system. Tehran has denied the allegations.
At least 4 soldiers have been killed in a shooting at a military base in the Indian border state of Punjab. The army says the base has been locked down to search for the gunman. The attack took place in the canteen Police say it's not believed to be terror-related.
Myanmar's military says it carried out an airstrike on a village in the northwest of the country that left up to 100 people dead. It says the village was targeted for holding a ceremony to mark the opening of an office for their local volunteer defence force. The United Nations says school children performing dances at the time of the attack were among the victims. The opposition National Unity government has denounced what it calls a barbaric and brutal attack.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the diner who discovered a dinosaur. An extraordinary story of a restaurant and prehistoric footprints.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew. And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Well, 2 years after announcing it was going to build a new space station, Russia says it's a little closer to getting into orbit.
But while expectations were that a draft proposal would be ready for Wednesday's Cosmonaut Day, plans have again been delayed. Our correspondent Stuart Smith reports now from Moscow.
It's meant to replace Russia's presence on the aging International Space Station, which is now operating well past its initial 15-year lifespan. Plans for a new station were announced 2 years ago, with a view to have it in orbit by 2025. But it's since had liftoff pushed back to 2027, and Russia now says it wants to stay part of the ISS until 2028 in order to ensure no break of its presence in orbit. But so far there's publicly been little more than a CGI video and this plastic model, and draft plans have been delayed again to later in the year. Even the purpose of the station is still undecided. President Vladimir Putin suggested on Wednesday it might help with Russian attempts to get to the moon. But Roscosmos says it's still in talks with universities and research institutes about the specifics of what it could be used for.
Scientific experiments will be carried out, in particular observation of the Earth, observation of other space objects, some experiments related to materials, science, biology and medicine, and in general it's largely clear that it will be the same as on the ISS, but only at a new technical level.
The need for a new setup in space became even more salient after Moscow-Western relations nosedived due to the so-called special military operation, and Western sanctions on the export of high-tech equipment to Russia will have to be factored into that equation. While Russia's future space station still requires some serious thought, on Cosmonaut Day on Wednesday, Muscovites turned their minds to questions of the cosmos and Moscow's spacefaring past. According to a poll last year, 71% of Russians want the country to maintain its leading position in astronautics. To that end, Roscosmos is also working on a new space center and the launch of a constellation of satellites, which it calls its #1 priority. But paying for it all will be one of the challenges. Roscosmos called losses last year a disaster after $600 million in revenue from launching other countries' spacecraft largely dried up. though there was confirmation again on Wednesday that space remains one of the few niches where joint work does continue for now, despite what Roscosmos called the political situation. Stuart Smith, CGTN, Moscow.
And members of Russia's Communist Party have laid flowers at the tomb of Yuri Gagarin, marking the 62nd anniversary of the first human flight into space. Gagarin's 108-minute mission took the space age to a new frontier. It marked an historic achievement for the Soviet Union, which beat the United States in a race to launch a man beyond Earth's atmosphere. And that sparked a space race that eventually led to the United States, putting a man on the moon 8 years later.
A diner at a Chinese restaurant in Sichuan province last year found more than just a good dinner, and the scientific community is still talking about it. The diner has discovered a set of ancient footprints, and recently a team of scientists validated the fossil as 100-million-year-old dinosaur footprints. Our correspondent Tao Yan reports.
Some big discoveries can come from the most unlikely places. Zhu Min walked past these pits every day to fetch water from the well. She liked the primitive touch they add to her restaurant courtyard, but never stopped to give them a second thought. Until last July, when a curious customer pointed out there might be something more to them.
A gentleman named Mr. O came to eat, and he noticed the puddles had a certain pattern.
Oh Hongtao is a dino enthusiast.
It was truly a highlight moment of my life. I was drawn by the beautiful courtyard, and then I realized the puddles, each on its own. They were just ordinary holes, but together they formed a pattern that looked like the footprints of a very large cat or dog.
Southwest China's Sichuan Basin boasts some of the world's most significant dinosaur fossil discoveries. But the Leshan area has no skeletal record of the prehistoric animal. O couldn't be sure, so he took some photos and reached out to Professor Xing Li Da, a well-known paleontologist.
We receive nearly 100 tips each year. Most are false reports. But Mr. O took a lot of photos, and I thought it looked like a real deal.
Professor Xing and his team flew from Beijing to Leshan.
We cleared the entire courtyard thoroughly. There was a lot of water in many of the footprints. We had to clean up the water, along with the moss and dirt. And then, in certain footprints, you can see depression left at the toes very clearly. I was 100% sure that these were footprints left by dinosaurs.
Recently, Professor Xing and a team of international scientists published their research findings, validating the footprints as tracks of the sauropod dinosaur, two youngsters dating back 100 million years in the Cretaceous period.
Sauropods are a fascinating group of creatures and were the largest land animals to have ever lived on Earth. The largest sauropods can reach over 40 meters in length. Imagine, these giant animals roamed the Earth for more than 100 million years.
Taoyuan, CGTN, Leshan.
The headlines again. Inflation in the United States eases to the lowest level in 2 years, but some goods and services show the cost of living crisis has not yet gone away.
US President Biden urges the Northern Ireland Assembly to reconvene before arriving in Dublin on the latest leg of his trip to Ireland.
And Brazil's president arrives in China for his state visit, with trade and investment top of his agenda.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.